edition of Reboot. 9 weeks of Reboot. My name is Kelly Slessor, and I am delighted to be hosting this event brought to you by the City of Sydney and supported by Service New South Wales Business Connect programme. Before we start, I want to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, traditional owners of the land, and pay my respects to elders past and present and emerging. As well as acknowledging that we're all here today on different lands. And so I welcome you from whichever land you are on and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from wherever you join us today. And it's an honour and privilege to have been able to do that for the past 9 weeks. If this is your first Reboot, you're a bit late to the party, week 9. Welcome, welcome. You can go back and watch all of the previous sessions, but this is going to be an awesome one, and I cannot wait to introduce you to our speakers today. If you've been here before and you've been on this 9-week journey with me, thank you and welcome back. And I'm so glad to have you. And well done to you for taking time out of your business to work on your business. I would love to know in the chat, for those people that have been here before, and have been on this journey with me for the past 9 weeks or for some of it, of watched recordings, one piece of advice that you've got from this series that you can share with the rest of the world. I would love you to drop that piece of advice or information or something that you've taken from this series that has helped your business, will help your business in the future, or some action that you're going to do as a result of being on this series. It's always nice to know what some of the takeouts are. So anyone that's been on before, Sabrina, Rebecca, I'm watching you. If you can be generous, thank you, Amanda. If you can be generous and share, that would be amazing. All right, so Reboot. There have been 9 events in total, as I've mentioned. This is the final one. They've been happening every Tuesday from 12 till 1, and this is the last session. I'm excited to have you all here today. As I said, you can go and rewatch all of the amazing sessions. We've had digital, I would say that because that was me. We've had digital, we've had Justin Hems, we've had people and purpose, we've had networking, we've had branding and sales. We've had so many, and I'm just reading the comments in here. Simple stories tell volumes. That's so true. Perseverance is absolutely key. I love this. Thank you so much for sharing. So we've had some amazing sessions. So the link's just gone in the chat. So if you want to jump on and watch some of those sessions, you're more than welcome to. They will be available to you. The sessions are all recorded. So this will be recorded, and follow-up EDMs will be sent to you with the recording. So if you get distracted by the cat, the dog, the child, the doorbell, you can come back and rewatch it. They will be sent out to you this week. At the end of the session, we're going to post a link in the chat. It is so important to get your feedback on these sessions. I'm hoping that this happens again next year. And if it does, it would be great to know what worked, what didn't work, what can be improved, and what was of value to you all. So please, please, please drop your comments and your feedback in that survey. I am so excited. That survey will only take 2 minutes. Also, we are going to do a Q&A. We're going to change it up a bit this week. Normally we do a Q&A right at the end, but we have the amazing Hunter Johnson, who is doing a capital raise and is crazy busy, and you will understand why when he talks through his story and journey. So he has to jump off at 12:30. However, we have James, his new general manager, on as well, and James is equally amazing. So I'm going to do an intro to both of them in a second, but it just means we're going to change it up. So if you have Q&A questions, put them in the Q&A. Yeah, Kylie Captain was amazing, absolutely phenomenal. If you have Q&A, please drop them into the Q&A, not into the chat, because Selvi and Sierra have to copy them across. Thank you to Selvi and Sierra for managing everything in the background. And we'll actually answer that before he jumps off. So without further ado, to give you as much time as possible, Hunter Johnson is the founder and CEO of 2 purpose-driven organizations. Hunter leads the Man Cave, an emotional, intelligent charity that has impacted the lives of 30,000 young men. And it almost makes me want to cry when I say this. My 13-year-old son is one of those men that he has meant to be, that he has impacted with mental health. He also leads the brand Stuff, a men's purpose-driven personal care brand that champions health, masculinity. He works as an advisor to the Queen's Commonwealth Trust. I'm not sure how that works anymore, but I'll get some insights on that. And a charity supporting young people throughout the Commonwealth. James Localita, I hope I've said that right, James, is the general manager of the Man Cave. Prior to that, he was the Chief Executive Officer of Pride Cup. He's also been an accelerator coach for Melbourne Uni and RMIT, and he is one of the top voices on LinkedIn. We have got so much gold here for you. So I just want to say welcome to Hunter and James. It's so great to have you guys here. I'm so excited for this session. Let's get into it because I know you've got to jump off, Hunter. So can you start with telling us your story, your why? What made you start the Man Cave and then go on to launch Stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for the opportunity to be here. And everyone's tuning in. Nice to, really just thanks for sharing some of your time with us. My name's Hunter. Before we do that, just want to acknowledge the incredible First Nations people that we're so lucky to live alongside in the land we're on. So I'm on the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country, and what an exciting time we are to start to recognise the brilliance of our First Nations people even more. I can't keep fanning that flame any more than I can. So thank you so much to all the First Nations people that continue to be so incredibly generous and patient with the rest of Australia. So I started this charity, Man Cave, like 8 or 9 years ago. Definitely was not the game plan to run a charity that tried to make it cool for young men to talk about their feelings. I didn't know that was an actual job you could have. But it's interesting in hindsight, I can kind of join the dots as to how it all made sense. So I grew up in a very masculine environment and totally drank the Kool-Aid for way too long. But I also saw my older brothers go through years of their own mental health journey. No one talked about it. My stepdad, the same thing. Mates I grew up with, the same thing. And then eventually that led into more serious mental health situations like suicidality and suicide in my friendship group, but no one talking about it. And then as the other side of it, as I started to grow up and mature, I also started to hear the women's stories in my life and started to hear the impact of men's behavior on them, whether systemically or from interpersonal relationships. And it just didn't make sense to me that the systems we have to deal with, whether it is mental illness, whether it is family violence, whether it is gender equality, whether it is incarceration rates, education dropout rates, that those systems are geared around crisis management. And very little goes on at a preventative or an early intervention level. I could definitely not articulate it as coherently back then. But now, after about 8 or 9 years in the game, we have really just seen masculinity move through what I would call an inflection point. The models or the scripts that, say, my father or my grandfather's generation inherited around what it meant to be a man is very different to what's being requested or required right now. And what I would say is we're in a really confusing time where we can say this after, it's actually about 50,000 young men we've worked with now, Kelly, that they're confused. They're feeling lost. They're feeling a sense of isolation. There's a lack of purpose. And there's a real disruption in their maturation into healthy adulthood. And our whole belief at Man Cave is if we can focus on boys' strengths rather than their deficits, we can invest in our emotional and social skills in a way that's entertaining and engaging as well as informative, then they'll be better, their relationships will be better, our families will be better, our communities will be better, our workplaces will be better. And I often say, although we work with young men in high schools, it's absolutely not just about those young men. It's really about the ecosystems around them. So what would I say? How did that evolve? So Man Cave we run school programs, and it's really around healthy character development for young men. Our facilitators, we've got about 40 facilitators who range from they're an eclectic bunch. I'd say it's like a motley crew of masculinity. We've got, everything from First Nations backgrounds to former refugees, former child soldiers, kids who love drama to former footy players to rappers who really represent the cross section of masculinity. And the idea is that they represent the masculinity we experience in classrooms. That we train them like a sports team. So a sports team on the human condition, opposed to just getting goals, but they have the ability to understand everything from mythology and storytelling to positive psychology to trauma-informed practices to how to use your body language to develop psychological safety. And it's been an extraordinary ride. We've now, as I said, work with about 50,000 young men. We're at about 200 high schools. We do a lot of work through Man Cave Academy, which is their parents, teachers, educators. We do a lot of research around young men. So what are they thinking, feeling, believing? We use that research to work with groups like the Department of Home Affairs. Their concern used to be the radicalization of young Islamic men. It's now young white men. So we can double click on that later, but it's a real issue of our times. And then the fourth area is a bit of a COVID innovation. We started to run our programs over a gaming platform called Twitch over COVID. So we figured, how do we meet the boys where they're at? Where are they spending their attention? Often on their consoles. And so our facilitators log on a couple nights a week for what we'll call like a digital after school care program, where they can talk about things like heartbreak, like rejection, like body image, like mental health, but also like how to find your purpose. And that's been a really cool, non-conformative, innovative way to kind of work and develop relationships with our, the people that we serve. And there's some amazing stories that come out of the digital side of things. Like we had one boy, Bo Johnson, who's an Indigenous kid from central New South Wales, just find us online and was like, holy shit, you can have conversations like this online. This is amazing. And we've been able to kind of monitor his language. So how much he was using the articulation of his emotional world, how much responsibility he was taking in his life over the last few months. He then invited us into his school. So we rock up to his school. He's kitted out in Man Cave merchandise and becomes like the hero of his town. And he's just emailed me over the last week to come and do work experience with us. Absolutely. So like a really beautiful story, just like, obviously we know technology can be a tool, for enslavement or like excitement in innovation. And it's a beautiful example of that.
And I laid bare testament to the Twitch. So my son jumped on Twitch and was, actually after a conversation with you, I said to him, why don't you jump on? And he was like, what, I can game in the evening after school? I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. So he's talking away and chatting and it was great for him. It's a therapy session, right? Without him even realizing it's a therapy session.
That's right. And what we really try to do is position ourselves as what I'll call like the conscious Trojan horse. So we speak the language, wear the clothes, are that non-authoritative, relatable role model who can deliver advice or perspective that's outside of the direct family unit in a way that really resonates. And that's something that's like incredibly primal. We know that for thousands of years that when young people are kind of 12 to 16, they break away from their parents and they seek mentoring and guidance elsewhere, which used to be from the community, or the village, the synagogue, the town hall, the mosque, the church. And now it's often on their devices where they get that extra support. And that's where we've seen, radical influences like Andrew Tate really kind of capture the zeitgeist and bring boys on a very extreme journey. So that's a very long-winded way, Kelly, of saying
oh no, I love it.
My why. And and I just think a lot of what we're dealing with in the world, whether it's male leaders making decisions that are about conquest and not custodianship, can often be stemmed down to trauma, to be honest. And often when I hear the phrase toxic masculinity, I don't actually use that. I just find it's very divisive. But what I do is I swap that out in my head and I think of it as intergenerational trauma. I think if we come at it through that lens and empower these young men through their character and through positive role models, the world will be a much better place.
Yeah, totally agree. And what amazing work you're doing. What are some of the challenges you faced in setting up a social enterprise?
Yeah, so Man Cave is about 60% funded by grants and philanthropy and donations. About 35% of our income comes from charging schools based on their socioeconomic status. Mm-hmm. So if we're in a private school, they'll pay a premium. If we're in regional town, they'll pay a subsidy. And then we have just started the journey with government. We're about 5-ish% of government funding. We get some funding around consent education for young men and then respectful relationships. Through that journey, I was like, what would it look like to diversify our funding stream? And I just saw that the more digging I did, the more I saw that the men's personal care space was just like ripe for disruption. It was super sterile. You know, I grew up watching like Lynx and Lynx Africa, which was like spray yourself and a flock of gorgeous women come chasing you. And it's like, I'm still waiting for that to happen. You know, the Old Spice ads, exactly. It's like, you kind of giggle about it. But then, you know, I picked up a can of Lynx Africa and I was like 11, or it got handed to me, you know, and this is the subtle objectification of misogyny that starts to get infused in the earliest moments of boyhood that start to shape the worldview. And, you know, that kind of whole space hadn't been disrupted in a really long time. So yeah, the more digging I did, I was like, shit, I think there's something here. And that was about 4 years ago. Basically we got to launching a brand called Stuff. And the reason we set that up was we wanted to create a new revenue stream for our charity, but also to drive, you know, commercial outcomes for the investors. So effectively, Man Cave is the largest shareholder of Stuff. It's a for-profit business. So if there is some exit in, you know, however many years' time, Man Cave and the investors get a kickback. But for every $1,000 in sales, we'll also fund a boy from a low socioeconomic community to go through Man Cave's program. So there's a shorter term funding mechanism there. We're in about 1,600 points of sale and in Woolies, in Priceline, about to launch into Sephora. Ian Thorpe has just come on as an investor, which is amazing. And yeah, really, we want to kind of use the power of brand to disrupt some of the outdated stereotypes that really shackle many men.
How do you, so we've got people on here that sell direct to consumer that are trying to make that break into, I'm going to talk about purpose as well, but I just want to pick up on the kind of Woolies connection and things like that. How have you made that break into some of those big players? What things have you done to get in there and to, you know, cement the brand?
Yeah, so we launched originally direct to consumer, and it was like the week before Facebook and Apple had their big disagreement, and that really kind of was like the massive curveball for us. So we had to pivot pretty quickly to redesign the brand and the strategy into retail. So for us, you know, 70% of men still buy their personal care items in the major pharmacy and grocery channels. So that was different to how we set up our business. We had to flip that pretty quickly. And then we really had to focus on, like, what is the story that we're telling? How do we capture the hearts and the minds of the buyers? But also, how do we make sure that we're positioning ourselves in a category that, you know, is growing? And that's really what we've had to really assess. But the other thing, which we've, you know, coming back to the purpose element, is like, if someone's got 1 second to make a decision on a shelf, if they don't know your brand, the branding itself has to capture the attention and the eyeballs in a split second. You know, I think Daniel Kahneman would call that system 1 thinking. And then the second thing is the product has to be very strong. So I learned very early on, good marketing just helps a bad product fail faster. So we've worked really closely with ASOP or ESOP. Some of you might be familiar with. One of the ex-head of innovation and product there has supported us with our ingredient formulations. So we know that whilst the purpose is great as like almost a retention strategy, the acquisition strategy has to be how it stands out on shelf and the quality so that they do come back.
And would you say you've used, or that purpose has helped you open those doors? So getting into Woolies, how did you practically or tactically actually get into Woolies?
Yeah, it was super hard and super expensive, to put frankly. I'm actually blown away by how difficult it is to get a product on a shelf. We had to work out how to pull together a pitch deck for a buyer. Like, we'd never done that before. Yeah. There are people who act as kind of trade agents who can support you to do that, but, you know, come at a particular cost. And then it's understanding how often are the range reviews, how do you get in contact with those who manage the range reviews. And we did all that through a group called Ranged, RANGED, which I couldn't speak highly enough of.
And they helped you kind of get those connections and contacts, and then you pulled the pitch together and went in and pitched.
Definitely. Yeah, we basically did that. And then we just hustled hard. Like I was on the phone. Like yesterday I cold called the CEO of Chemist Warehouse, you know, fucking it at the same time. But I'm like, I got to shoot my shot here. You know, this is what it's about. So yeah, effectively that was, you know, and what we did was engaging with the purpose, but the purpose doesn't mean the product will sell. So we have to ensure that the volume is moving through the accounts.
Cool. So getting back to purpose, I know everyone's really keen to talk about purpose. So what I want to know, I see a lot of businesses that, you know, have a purpose, but it's not necessarily aligned. You've kind of built a business with purpose and built the business around that purpose. And now you're kind of building another business that is kind of, you know, aligned with that purpose. How do you go about identifying, firstly, your purpose and clearly articulating that? And then secondly, how do you go about building a business that really, you know, really drives that mission?
Yeah, well, I guess there's personal purpose and then there's business purpose. I think purpose is a word that's probably been greenwashed a bit at the moment. Like, you know, businesses, kind of everyone's saying they've got their own, you know, unique purpose. I think just to create some distinctions, there's like your business, whatever industry it's in, can have its purpose, its sole reason to exist around why you're doing, like what is the vision you're working towards? What's your big, hairy, audacious goal that everything is channeling towards? And then there's also what this category called purpose-driven businesses, which effectively means an authentic social impact built into the DNA of your business. And what I would say is that if we come back to that type of purpose, as this is the webinar, yeah, there's no substitute for authenticity. You know, the conversations we've had with, you know, Unilever and Procter and Gamble is they say we can create a, you know, skincare or deodorant business overnight. We can't replicate the authenticity of the 8 years of Man Cave. And so I think as consumers all of us are getting more savvy to when people are taking brands for a ride or just like capitalizing on market trends, authenticity around what it is you are doing, why you are doing it, who are you serving is one of the most important thing. And then on the personal front, you know, I think the best, you know, way to discover your purpose is through service to others. It really is through generosity. And it's, you know, we often, you know, there's a great quote about that. You find yourself when in service of others. So I think, yeah, that's where to begin and just wait to see what captures your attention and your heart.
Yeah. How do you bake that in? How do you make sure that in everything you do, your team do, that purpose is baked into kind of the fabric of the organization? Because it's very easy as operators, you know, I operate in the retail space, busy. It's just busy, you know, and to you know, and a lot of them have a real driver that is based on purpose, but often they get caught in the day-to-day and the purpose piece gets forgotten and they get lost.
Yeah, there's a great Melbourne charity called Igniting Change, and I'll borrow a concept from them, which is to meet the people and feel the issues. So I think, you know, if some of our government stakeholders had that approach, we'd have a very different society. But I also think it's really important that, we go into the communities upon which we're serving and build deep, long-term relationships, which is so important. This isn't about a fly in, fly out virtue signaling experience that looks great on LinkedIn. This is about deep, proper, sustained impact. And yeah, I think the felt experience of all team members into the cause upon which you are serving is so paramount. I think the next thing to think about is how is it infused into your daily practices inside of your business. So I'll give you an example from Man Cave. We run with teenage boys, basically circles where they check in with one another, where they take off the mask they're wearing and talk about what's in their space today, what's the emotional load they're carrying. It's incredibly cathartic, and they're like, can we talk about this? And it's beautiful to witness. We do that inside of the Man Cave. So it's a practice that is out in the communities we serve, but we also do that at the office. And the beautiful thing about that is the authenticity and the vulnerability actually builds fantastic connection and builds trust, which actually allows us to be quite a high performing outfit because there is that understanding And, also like I had a meeting with a very significant partner last week who came in charging like 1,000,000 miles per hour. And I was like, I think I just need to slow this down a bit. Basically just said, hey, we got this cultural practice called a check-in. Would you be comfortable if I just ran you through it? We'll role model it and we can go for it and just share as much as you're comfortable. And, he stopped. And then as he shared, he's like, oh, this guy's grandma passed away. It was his final, lasting grandparent. And he was like, thanks so much for just bringing that in. I would have just kept going, but actually I haven't processed that news. I just got it on the car trip here. So yeah, I think that's one of the beautiful things around creating a work environment where people bring their humanity first. It connects to the purpose and then people really believe in the cause.
Yeah. So from that, I'm taking you can actually schedule time in with you and your team, whether that be on a weekly or monthly basis. Let's say your purpose is about the planet and sustainability, actually scheduling time in with the team to talk about that and look at ways in which you can drive change in that area. But it's dedicating time to give it space, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I think we've got to catch ourselves in the busyness of because everything's important all the time. And if you're a startup, your job is to endlessly, continually reprioritize. But if you're not stopping to feel why you are doing what you're doing, it just becomes transactional. So I think, building in cultural days, whether it's cultural practices that bring to life the emotion and the feeling, actually, create an environment that people want to come to, but it becomes alive in the culture of your workplace. And then, for most of our humanity, we've been an oral species. So storytelling is one of the most powerful and profound things we can do. And I think finding ways to bring in stories of your purpose into your business consistently start to really bring it to life as well, particularly for those who might not have the option to get out into the community.
Yeah. Big question. Can you have purpose and profit? Because that's always a struggle, right?
Yeah, I've kind of been in the social sector for a number of years, and profit's been a scary word. But for me, it's you need money to fund your impact, put really simply. And obviously, depending on what business model you choose, one option is the profit goes back into the business to ensure you're growing and sustainably growing. But you got to be really careful. I think we've seen countless examples of people who have leveraged their social capital they have, and the goodwill, and have capitalized that from a monetary perspective. And it's just frustrating, I think, to see that sometimes they're the major stories that people get to ask so much or get to hear so much. They're waiting for the bad story, but it's really interesting noticing the trend in many philanthropists now who you didn't used to want to fund overheads of charities, that now they're very happy to give what's called untied funding, which is basically funding to the charity to use to the best of their ability, because they understand overheads has to come with impact. And obviously we're all living in this kind of cost of living challenge right now.
Awesome. Look, I've got a quick question for you because I know you have to jump off. So the question is, from Suze, who says, my work is with primary schools. Any tips on how best to approach reach schools and generate interest in children's health programs?
Absolutely. I think we often say delivering the message. So the messenger is as important, if not more important than the message, which is kind of counterintuitive. It's like, particularly at that age, they want someone who has high energy, like resonates with, I guess, the way that they like to learn. So that's like a really important message. The messenger is as important, if not more important than the message. And then subsequently, it's just getting in and do a really, really good job, and then tell really fantastic stories, build long-term relationships with schools and ask them for introductions. So suddenly you start to build a pod around, and then you can leverage that into the next phase of your growth. And then I think, success leaves clues. So just, spend time. Like when I started Stuff, I caught up with like Daniel Flynn from Thank You, Simon Griffiths from Who Gives a Crap, Jordan O'Reilly from Higher Up. I just did a tour and I hustled them hard to just get time. So I think, I know the Resilience Project do really great work in primary schools. So that's probably one just to kind of work out. I know Smiling Mind are also doing great work in primary schools. So I would just study them and understand what they do, and really find what your point of difference is and be able to really clearly articulate that.
Yeah, and it's interesting actually. We had Will from Archie Rose on at the very beginning, and one of the comments, you know, successful entrepreneurs, one of the things that is a theme between all of you, Justin Hems as well, the hustle, like not being fearful of picking up the phone and calling someone who gives a crap and saying, hey, can we have a catch up and share some knowledge on this and download your brain. The last question is, what are 3 things that businesses can do to make sure that their people and their products align with their purpose, especially people? I think people's a real challenge.
Yeah, I think we covered it. That I really like that line of meet the people, feel the issue. So as much as you can get your staff into the community you're serving is something to really take seriously. It also becomes something that they can use in their conversations with stakeholders or when they're out at the barbecue having a chat. The other thing I think is important, they say that, fish rot from the head, which is another way of saying that that's where kind of culture starts to really disintegrate. So if you are the leader, are you walking the walk? And that's really, really important. And that goes, how much care are you taking of yourself? A great thing I've learned about leadership in that regard is your energy introduces you before you speak. So people feel you before that you say anything. And, I think they can feel the culture, they can feel the purpose through you. You are the walking advertisement of that. I think also like with your staff, like how do you create environments where they can articulate their why as to why they are working at your organization? What is their inherent why? And how do you create pockets of consistent rhythm where they can share that internally? So it starts to everyone understands this is the common purpose that we're working towards.
And how do you do that? How do you do that in Man Cave with your staff?
Yeah, great. I think
Or maybe James
profiling. So what we've done over the years, a variety of different things. So we've got an internal newsletter where people articulate more about themselves, some questions that kind of go a few layers back than from what they are, you just see in their 9-to-5 person doing their job. But then we also, in our weekly check-ins as well, create space where we can just open up questions like that. So this is the focus of what we're going to talk about today. Why are you here? Why does this organization mean something to you? Like what matters about this for you? And start to build those deeper, more reflective questions into your culture are really, really powerful.
Yeah, awesome. It'd be great actually to bring James in. And Hunter, I know you've got to go and jump on a capital raising. So good luck with that.
Yeah, thanks so much. And yeah, everybody, I just want to say thanks so much for your time. And yeah, if you have any further questions, like please go through Kelly and I'll look to answer them. And yeah, we're in a capital raise at the moment, but I wanted to make this call, so I'll jump off now. But thank you so much. And yeah, we also said if anyone wants to support stuff or buy stuff as a gift, there's a code REALSTUFF20 for 20% off. So if you're interested, but thanks so much.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Hunter, for sharing. James, tell us your story quickly. Tell us your background, because I know you've got a fascinating history and you can bring so much to this conversation.
Yeah, and thank you for having me. I think listening to Hunter just reinvigorates why I'm so excited to be part of the Man Cave. And I'm fairly new, for those that don't know, I'm fairly new to the Man Cave and have had almost 2 decades of experience in other areas in the for-profit and also the for-purpose space. So learning a lot from Hunter over the last few weeks has been incredible. But my story starts, like I think a lot of other people's stories in for-purpose land, is that it came from my personal narrative. It came from who I was and how I was brought up, but also how I was treated by others. Coming out very early on as an openly gay man at an all-Catholic boys' school, was something that I thought was brave and my parents thought was brave, but there was that very different feeling of a lot of people that were at that school than how my parents were feeling. And I found myself being tortured in a lot of ways inside of myself and who I was, and questioning that, and then coming out and being open about who I was, but other people not understanding my journey and not being able to really have those models in their world that showed what being LGBTI or a gay person was like within those environments. So I copped criticism. I remember PE and sports class, homophobic and transphobic comments were thrown around more than what the ball was in a lot of those classes. And for me, it cut me down and it cut me deeper and deeper every time. And I never saw teachers or those that that had those authorities or those powerful figures within the school stand up for who I was, but also stand up for my community, even if they didn't understand it, just stand up for not using that language or those words. And when after graduating from university, I became a youth counsellor, and my story wasn't just my story, it was the story of millions of others across Australia. And I learned that very quickly as I was running my counselling sessions, that this was something I kept hearing. The school-based environment wasn't always the most affirming or kind to boys like me, but also to people with other differences. To people all across the world. And I really wanted to do something or change the environment around that. And that's when I founded my first organization when I was 21. And that really delved into how can we ensure LGBTI inclusion is paramount to a lot of people's mindsets, looking at schools, but more importantly, looking at sporting clubs and associations where that homophobia is so rife, and tackling that.
Yeah, I love that. And what an amazing job you're doing. I'm fascinated. You've literally, you're new into Man Cave, and it'd be great to hear this from the other side. And Hunter's not on, so he can't hear you anymore.
Good.
We can just edit this bit out. I'm fascinated to hear. So for all of those people running businesses, for all of those people on the webinar now who have a purpose, not necessarily are kind of, implementing that, what are some of the key things that Hunter has done in your onboarding process that have really got you connected to that? I mean, he's touched on some of them, but from your point of view, what's the advice you can give to some of people on the webinar that go, when you hire someone new, if you've got a strong purpose, these are the things you need to do to make sure that they are part of that journey?
What a question, Kelly. And what a great experience for those listening in as well, that I have just been through this process. So Hunter just talked about it, but what I can authentically say is that what Hunter has said is what I've received. The one thing that I understood before I even stepped foot on my first day was what the purpose of the Man Cave was. I knew going in what that purpose was, and I felt that purpose as I walked through the doors. Yes, the check-ins that we do are real. We do real check-ins on many mornings as well, and just with staff in the office. And one more thing that I was so excited to be part of was in my second day of being part of the organization, I was sent out to a program where I watched the facilitators, who are the lifeblood of the organization, delve deep with these young boys. I watched something that I thought could never happen in my 11 years of C-suite experience in the for-purpose land. I watched them do a very different thing than what I've been doing for the last 11 years, but break down those barriers that boys and young men are seeing within their worlds and opening about who they are, what their struggles are. I learned about boys who are having issues with their parents and not knowing how to really be themselves, or tell them that they don't want to play that sport anymore, or that they want to go into dancing, or a lot of different things that were being brought up in front of their classmates. And that brought me back to that purpose. It brought me back to everything that I'd learned about coming into the organization. And Hunter and the team here, they exude that purpose. It's not just about we are running a business that has a purpose. We're running a purpose that has a business attached to it. And I think that's really important to remember.
And that's a difference, right? Because I love that you are, and that's a difference, because I think a lot of us are running a business. We're doing it the other way around, right? We've got a business, and in that business, either we found our purpose, we've tried to find our purpose, or we've discovered something we can do to give back. So I think it is slightly different. I love the check-in piece that you talked about. Practically, is that basically, what you're saying is get your team in and get them doing the stuff that is purposeful quite early on, like get them seeing it, involved in it, and even if you are, a retailer that is recycling your waste, getting them actually doing that recycling of waste to get them on board that process. If you are a, accountant that works with underrepresented groups or children, actually getting them out into the community quite early on and being able to experience why you do what you do.
It's that old saying, you can't be what you can't see. It's why our board members, some of the most incredible board members that we have at the Man Cave, are all required and want to come to our programs, to come and see what we do, to see the lifeblood, to understand what our purpose is. Because without purpose, we are just a for-profit organization. With
Yeah.
this purpose, we're changing the lives and the well-being of boys all across the country, but also this prevention that then changes so many of those systemic problems that we see down the track. We can get to so early on. And Hunter touched on how being reactive is probably what's funded most, or what we're seeing, like a GoFundMe campaign comes up because something has gone wrong. And that's when we're giving money. That's when we're working on that program or that process. But shifting that narrative on its head and working in prevention, something that at the Man Cave, we do so well, but also something that needs to be much more looked into the future for our governments and our resourcing as well, is let's get into those prevention programs. So those 16-year-old boys that we were working with last week are changing their lives, their behaviors, their attitudes, because when we're focusing on this, what we call this rites of passage into becoming a man, into showing who you are, we're tackling those issues that come much further down the track, those of domestic violence, those of how men are treating women because of how they've been brought up. But most importantly, we're giving them role models who they haven't had in their lives.
Yeah, I love that. And Greg just put in the chat that as a marketing business, he only hires people with disabilities and NDIS providers, which is awesome. That, you know, things like that. So on that, I have a question around, how do you actively seek out people that align with your purpose? So it's a tough one, because when you're, you know, a busy business just trying to recruit people, you recruit people for skill set.
Yes.
Should we be recruiting people for purpose, value, like purpose alignment?
I think what you find a lot in the purpose space is that your marketing exudes your purpose. And those people that want to join your organization usually also do the same. So I think that a lot of the times when we're out looking, hiring for new facilitators, new program managers, new admin staff, whatever it might be, what we're seeing is that a lot of those like-minded people are coming in and applying for the organization and really want to be part of our process and our programs, but also join the cave, join the Man Cave and be in that. Obviously, you do need to always put in some regulations and some ideas about who you want as part of the organization, but being really nimble in that as well, ensuring that if somebody comes in with lived experience, that is sometimes just as important as their learned experience as well. Lived experience is the reason why I got to where I was today, and why many of the for-purpose CEOs in great organizations are there today. It's not because of their business acumen growing up or what they did in uni. It's their lived experience, what they learnt by being themselves, by being authentically around those communities that they're trying to work with, and that's how they became great leaders.
Yeah, I love that. And Ross and Greg are sharing in the chat. Thank you for sharing about walking the talk, hiring attitude and training for skill, which is absolutely spot on. I just want to quickly touch on one thing, because we talk a lot about the marketing piece. How do you, and this is a curly one, James, and I'm sorry, but how do you as a business, how do I sit down and clearly articulate purpose? Because I think one of the challenges is, you know, I meet a lot of businesses, small businesses, and in the background, in the back room, they're doing some amazingly good work. Greg's just talked about hiring people with disabilities, but they don't talk about it. And I think often we don't want to seem like we're kind of going, look at me, I'm doing something really good for the world.
The savior effect.
Exactly.
Yes.
So I think shy away from it, but it is important not only to articulate it from a business point of view, but to articulate it so that we can drive change in our purpose. How do we do that?
Storytelling.
Yeah.
Hunter talked about it. I've called myself for many years a professional storyteller. The reason is, yes, you don't want that savior complex. We don't get into the for-purpose environment because we want to show off who we are or what we do. We get into it because we know a lot of the times it's the right thing to do. Sharing the stories of those that we've affected most. If you look at the Man Cave's social media, one of the things that is posted most regularly are DMs from those boys that go through our programs. Those boys who are sharing their experiences, their love for the programs, but also talking about how it affected them in change. it's all well and good for Hunter to talk about what we do at the Man Cave and those stories. It's not until you see the boys' attitudes, their behaviors, what they've written in and how it's affected them that we can really understand. Look at what we're marketing, who we're marketing, and who is part of our marketing campaigns. Are those from our community, those who, as Hunter suggested before, those who have been through the program and are now coming back and working with us. There's a story to tell. And those stories are so impactful for our consumers all across the globe. So it's really important that we are utilizing those stories, being storytellers and telling those stories of those who we're working for and who matter most to us, rather than just telling the own stories about our organization. That's not what it's about. It's about the change that can be made.
Yeah. So actually spending stories create raving fans. It's so true. So actually spending time curating and writing that story, and then using your customers as your biggest advocates around that storytelling. So we often use our customers to talk about our products, but actually getting them to talk about our purpose as well helps to disseminate that story and create followers that are engaged with not only our products and our services, but also our purpose as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of us look at customer reviews as like a 5-star or a 1-star, or what have they said on Google or Zomato or whatever it might be. But instead, flipping that narrative on its head, what are the stories that they can tell us about the impact that they've had by going through the programs at the Man Cave, for example, or being part of organizations where they've been hired as living with a disability, that one of the people in the conversation said before. Telling those stories that are so important, and that they break down the difference between us and them. It really showcases, it brings us together as a united front. And that's the way that we can gain more followers, also work harder, work with more and more people all across Australia, is because we're breaking down that difference, and they want to be part of a great movement, a for-purpose movement that's making a difference. And we're just showcasing that difference that's being made.
Yeah. So there was a question, is how can we use storytelling as an NDIS provider? And that's a really tough one. But actually, I would say, Rabea, have a look at what Man Cave are doing, because one of the toughest areas is teenage boys with mental health problems. Like, they don't want to talk about it to anyone, yet these guys actually are able to create stories out of this, and actually a lot of them do talk about it as a result of the work you're doing. I'll let you answer the question. Sorry, James, I jumped in there.
No, I think that was great, Kelly. And I think you're spot on. Is have a look at some of the things that the Man Cave has created, some of the videos and some of the series, and as well, going to people where they are is extremely important. So that's why Hunter talked about using Twitch. We know that's where a lot of young people are going for gaming, but utilizing that as a different form of marketing, but also getting the impact out of that as well. We're reaching a whole new demographic through using Twitch and through using that streaming service that hasn't really been done in this way before. I think as well, looking at those that want to share their stories. So it's not so much, I know you said about curating stories. Some of the best curated stories are those that are given to us, are those that are shared with us. And it's finding those powerful moments. Utilizing is probably the wrong word, but using them in our marketing and in our development of who we are to showcase the changes that we can make. In the NDIS, I see that question that was asked. I do see a lot of similarities between the boys that we work with. People don't always want to be seen. They don't always want to be shown in that public level. And have a look at some of the work that we've done and how we can showcase those stories without showcasing the boys behind them exactly as well.
Love that. And, just thinking of a great example, Ellie from Go for Zero, who's just been crowned #1 in e-commerce in Australia. If you get a chance to have a look at Go for Zero, it's amazing. She manages to entwine into her, obviously she's selling sustainable products, so it's on purpose, it's on brand, but within her stories, she managed to give little tips around, how to audit your waste bin, and it's not about product pushing, it's about saving the planet. And because of that, I'm so much more connected to her brand and her product than I would be if she was just selling me products that were great for the environment. She gives me tips on how to be a better person and how to do better for the environment. So I think that's a great place. So I'm going to be very open here and share. I'm going to be my own case study, guys. I hope you don't mind. And I would love you to jump in the chat and give me some feedback. So since this is the last one, I've put my hand up to be the case study. So here goes. This is a vulnerable moment. I basically, I help retailers grow online. Essentially, I'm an e-commerce coach. I've worked with retail and technology for all of my life, and I help businesses grow online, which is how I came involved in this. I have a huge passion for minority businesses for a number of reasons. I'm a Black woman in tech. There are a whole load of challenges that I have faced along my path and my journey, being a woman in tech, being a Black woman in tech, being in another country as a Black woman in tech. So there's some huge obstacles I've come across there, and I've seen other people go through that I don't want anyone to have to go through again. I also, my dad was a single parent, and he was disabled. So I grew up with a disabled father. So seeing someone who was super smart go from, working working full time to not being able to get a job, and his brain hadn't stopped working, his hands could still work. He was tech trained, which is where I get it from. But seeing that, just drives this purpose and passion in me for minorities, for people that are underrepresented, for groups that, that are not given the breaks, because sometimes our unconscious bias, and we all have it, we tend to connect to, hire, promote, talk about people that look like us, sound like us, and behave like us. So there's, it is a natural thing that humans do. So last year, I launched a program called the Digital Fishing Program, which is aimed at minority groups, and it's to use my e-commerce skills to really help those underrepresented groups. I did a remote community workshop out in Broome. I flew to Broome and worked with remote communities, which was amazing. I did a lot of Indigenous work. I worked with a child bride soldier, refugee, from Uganda. I worked with people from slavery. I worked with a lot of different groups. I worked with a disability organization, a social enterprise, which has a hotel. My challenge was, I spent so much time doing the pro bono work, doing this work, at night, in the morning, before I dropped the kids at school, at lunch, and I was burning out. I was traveling a lot. I was doing a lot of this work, and I was burning out. And it got to the point early on this year where I went, I've got to flip this switch, because I have to give back. It's part of what I need to do in this world, but I also can't do it at this rate and run a business. So my challenge, or my question to you, James, is for someone like me who is so passionate about driving this change forward, giving people more equal opportunities in the tech and e-commerce space. How do I do that without burning out, without, missing out on my kids, and with being able to do it in a profitable way?
Right. Firstly, in true Man Cave style, what I want to do is just share some gratitude on your story. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for talking about your family and your lived experience. And thank you for checking in as well. Like, that is a check-in in itself, is saying where you came from, how you're feeling at the moment, and where your struggles are. And to go back to what we do, to empower our employees and bring that in, that is what we do. We talk openly with one another, and we listen. So I want to just first say thank you, and thank you for the work that you provided. I think I'm going to replicate what Hunter has said here, and what probably a lot of people are going to say, is that for-purpose work isn't easy. And unfortunately, burnout does become part and parcel of charity work, of for-purpose work. And it's not fair that we do go through that. So I want to just say that I hear that, and that I've been there, and that it is, me just saying help with your work-life balance isn't going to fix that. It's about what can we strategically do within the organization to help lessen that workload and keep doing those things that you love to do. So those things that you love to do and the things that you want to do is provide pro bono support. Firstly, maybe it's about shifting that narrative. So I know that the work that you do in the retail space is so extremely important, and people love it. People love the work that you can provide. How can we shift that narrative and find that umbrella almost concept that can work what you do within the retail world and what you're doing within the pro bono world? So we talk a lot about circular economies, but looking at this like circular or longitudinal impact that you can have that makes you that the work that you do in retail makes you that person of choice because of what you can provide. So if we look at Stuff, for example, one of the things that Hunter didn't say with Stuff is that for every $1,000 of Stuff products purchased, one young boy will go through the Man Cave programs. So that's all provided through Stuff. How can we shift the narrative on what you do in the for-profit land to also go with your purpose? So when you're working with retail organizations and opting into that work, and you do the great things that you're so well respected for, how can you in turn get them along on that journey to say, and I might charge a small premium, but where that money is going is to ensure that I can continue doing this pro bono work or this work for people all across Australia, that those minority populations that you're working with, but it's still being funded through the funnel of the organization. So what you're doing is, yes, you might be adding a small margin there as well, but you're adding it for a purpose reason.
Yeah.
And that purpose reason isn't for bottom line. It's to ensure that you can have that effect on those people in the future. Because I'm certain that a lot of those larger clients that you're working with now started in those areas of those pro bono clients that you're working with. And what I found over the last 20 years in these spaces is that people do give a shit and they want to help in a lot of ways. It's not always the biggest driver, and we still need a really, really strong product. But the fact that you're here hosting this shows that you've got a strong product. It's about adding in that value asset and changing the way that we talk about the organization, that elevator pitch, that what you're doing in the retail environment can then go and help those minority populations all across Australia in providing those services to them.
Awesome. So out of that, I'm going, if I could do 10 retailers and give one pro bono, like 10 paid programs for one pro bono, that might be a way to go. James, I want to say thank you. You and Hunter have been amazing. And I love that you've tapped into people's purpose. And I love that we finish on this. I love that the last series in this session is about tapping into the stuff that matters to us the most, because that's what it's all about, really. You've been amazing. Thank you for the advice to me. I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate you. And thanks for taking your time out to give back to others. I want to thank all of the speakers on this series who have been phenomenal. A reminder, we'll send out the survey. We would love it if you could take some time to fill it out. Thanks for Greg for being top commentator today. Really appreciate you, and for all of the rest of you that have added to this session. I'm so grateful to you. I want to thank the City of Sydney, Service New South Wales Business Connect program. It's always a long-winded one that I have to try and get in, for putting on these events. This doesn't feel like work because I get to spend time with some amazing people. Thanks to Katrina and Selvi who have managed all of this and put on this event from the City of Sydney, and to Sierra and Rachel who have managed it from my side. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Book some time in your calendar, please, 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 for purpose. Even if it's 30 minutes every month, book in 30 minutes to think about your purpose, to connect back into it, and to try and work out how you can align it more in your everyday life. Because I know when I do my purpose stuff, it fills my soul with joy. James, have a great day. Thank you to everyone. Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Alicia. Thanks, Sabrina and Pavel. You guys are awesome. Adios. Hopefully I will see you next year.